Welcome everyone to today's webinar, especially those people that have returned, have been to our webinars before. As some of you know, we do these webinars a couple of times a month. Generally, the first Wednesday of the month is going to be an overview of ClubExpress, and this is usually done by our sales team. They give a general overview, or sometimes it's an overview with a particular slant, like for a bicycle club or a chamber of commerce or something like that. So to show how a particular type of organization might use ClubExpress. And then on the second and fourth Wednesday, we generally do sort of deep dives into particular bits of functionality, like we did one recently on the member interest module. And today we're going to be looking at a very small feature that was added fairly recently, and it's called the image editor. And we'll talk about the image editor and how we can use it and things like that in a little bit. I generally do a little introduction like this, then we'll go into a demonstration, and then we'll go into questions and answers. But let's first take care of a little bit of housekeeping. So what I've done is I've muted all of the phones and microphones. And any questions you have should be entered into the chat window. And you can enter questions along the way, and Chris, who's on our support team, will do his best to answer those questions. And if it's about something that I'm demonstrating, he may jump in and say, Alan, we have a question about such and such. Can we take a look at it? We will also revisit the open questions at the end so that people that are watching this as a recording later on have the benefit of what the questions were. Now, speaking of recordings, a recording of this webinar and all of our webinars will be available on the ClubExpress Cool Stuffs page. So if you go to clubexpress.com, and at the top of the page, click on Cool Stuff, and then click on the Webinars tab, you'll see the schedule of upcoming webinars, and you'll also see a list of recorded webinars. And the recent ones are listed, as are those by version or by functional. So you can see what you missed. And this is great if you want to share it with other people in your organization. Also, right above the webinars tab is the video tutorials tab, and it's got the listing of tutorials that are broken out also by recent tutorials and by control panel tab. And if you go to your control panel and click on the support tab, that same list of tutorials is there. The webinars are not, but the tutorials are there. And the tutorials, wherever possible, if you're looking at a help screen for a particular page that you're on in your website, the videos are linked in most of those help screens. Now, one thing we'd like for you to do is, if you're using ClubExpress, and in particular, if you like using ClubExpress and ClubExpress is doing something great for your organization, we would appreciate it if you go to clubexpress.com/reviews and click on one of these or more of these review sites and enter a review so other people that are evaluating association management solutions can have the benefit of your experience. So today is going to be about the image editor. Well, what is the image editor? Where is it available inside of ClubExpress, and where is it not available? And we'll talk about using some of these editor functions, how to rotate, resize, crop, adjust brightness, and how you might want to save it to a new file. And there are a couple of notes. We'll talk about this, about dealing with image transparency, what to do about file caching. And we actually got an email from one of our members, Cece, was having some questions about resizing existing images in another area. Not necessarily how to change the size of an image, but how do you change the display size of an image? And I thought it would be a good idea to show how you can change the display size of an image in custom pages, emails, and in, say, something like the page header. And then we'll talk very briefly about external image editors. So let me share my screen. By the way, I don't want to show you something very quickly. Just published a new tutorial video called Updating Your Member Profile, which you might want to take a look at and also maybe point some of your members to, because it goes through all of the things that a member can do when they're updating their own profile, like changing their email address or changing their forum photograph and things like that. And there are a couple of other tutorial and a webinar that you may want to look at following up on today's session One is called Photos, Albums, and Web Graphics, which goes into great detail about the difference between these three things and examples. And there's also a webinar, strangely enough, called Managing Photos, Photo Albums, and Web Graphics. So these are further discussions about what we're going to be talking about today, but we're just diving into one particular feature that features rather prominently in those photo and image management tasks. Just to recap, there's a difference between a photo and a web graphic, or just called an image. Photos are usually uploaded by members or by your club. You can decide whether or not members have the ability to create their own photo albums and whether or not they're displayed. And when you look at each photo, they get displayed, but they're also done in a couple of different sizes. When you upload a photo, it's uploaded as a thumbnail image, also as a screen size image, and also as the original high definition version. Photos are actually uploaded generally in three sizes. Web graphics, if I come up to the control panel, go to the website tab, and go down to web graphics are saved only in the original size. So whatever you upload, that's the size that they're stored in. And web graphics are generally used for things like the page header or logos or images that you're going to be using over and over again in custom web pages or in news articles and things like that. They're not stored in these multiple resolutions. There's no thumbnail for them. Web graphics can only be managed by administrators and coordinators of the web graphics function. But when you're in a module, so say if I come over here and we go into custom pages and I go edit a page, that's the difference. When we look up here, one says insert a photo and one says insert an image. And when you insert an image, it's looking at the web graphics area. When you insert a photo, it's looking at the photos that may or may not be displayed in photo albums. So photo albums are sort of just display mechanisms for photos that have been uploaded. So at least we know the difference between the two. So let's take a look. We're actually going to start with a photo. So you see we have photo albums which contain photos. Now, if you delete a photo album, it deletes that container, but it doesn't delete the photos because the photos may be in use in other albums. So let's look at photos here. And if I look over at this photo called Balloons Over Countryside, as I had searched for balloons, if I look over the Balloons Over Countryside, I can just look at the image, and that's going to preview the image here, much the same as displaying it in a photo album displays the image. If I edit, that's not editing the image, that's editing the metadata about the image. So you could be changing the title of the image or the caption on the image or the tags associated with the image, but it's not editing the image. It's editing the database record about the image. And you can copy the image URL, you can delete the image, and here's the relatively new item, and it is called the image editor. So when you click on the image editor, it opens the image full size. Now, right now, this window, because I've zoomed in on my screen, I can't open this window all the way. I could, of course, just zoom out on my browser, and I could resize the image here. And so now, I mean, it's a pretty big image. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back here, go back to my full size here, and do the image editor again, because I want to show you a couple of things. One of the things that people will do is they've uploaded an image and they realize, but the image isn't quite the way I like it, or it's not displaying quite right, or the image is too big, or the image is in the wrong orientation. So let's talk about this image editor and why you should or maybe should not use it. Ideally, You should upload photographs and images that are the right size and right orientation. But sometimes you may not have been the one to upload this thing. It may have been in somebody's photo album that one of your members uploaded. So they uploaded this image, and the image is really big, you see. So one of the things you might want to do is resize the image. So in this image editor, you can click here on this resize button. Now, unlike some of the other areas in ClubExpress, this does not give you a little image handles to resize. So what you need to do is you can either resize in one of three ways. One is you can just click this minus button here, and it will resize. I'm just keep clicking it a few times. It will resize and keep the aspect ratio. So you'll see these numbers here are changing, and they're staying, the proportion is staying constant. Another approach would be to just change the number here. So if I say I want this to be 200, if I say that this is 200 by 431 and I save it, it doesn't actually display any different until you save it by clicking this green check mark. Now we're going to get something that is actually 200 pixels by 431. So by changing the numbers there, we change the aspect ratio. Now, if you look at this and you say, oh, I didn't mean to do that, you could either cancel it or you can click the undo button. The undo button will undo your last change. And in fact, if you make a bunch of changes, you can undo every change you make. So let's assume here that I rotate this one to the right. Well, I'll rotate it to the left. And I decide to make it smaller. And I can undo that and undo that. So you can undo and redo whatever you want. Now you'll notice that on these three tools here, whenever you click on it, you get this plus minus check mark. There's usually an X mark, which is a cancel, and then perhaps some additional tools here. So when you go to resize, you can resize and scale proportionately. So if I decide I want to scale this to half size, you can just go up and down in half increments. So if I say I want half size and I click on apply, now we're getting something that was half as wide and half as tall as it was before. If I want to make something larger, which is unlikely that you would want to do it, now I get something really big because now it's 1390 by 1800 pixels. And if I undo that, interesting, I would expect these numbers to change, but it didn't change. If I were to cancel and come back in, now we get the normal 695 by 900 pixels. With the resize image, you can either do it by the plus and minus and then click on check. You can change the scale, or you could explicitly say, I want this to be 400 pixels by 600 pixels. When you click apply, that's the size it's going to be. Now, whether or not that's the correct aspect ratio, I don't know. But I'll have them check because this width should readjust to the current version, and it doesn't seem to be. So another thing that you might do, in fact, let me just make this image a little smaller. Another thing that you might do is you might want to adjust the brightness because something's a little too dark. So you can just click on the plus or the minus and make it a little lighter, a little darker. There's no contrast adjustment here, at least not yet. But a few weeks ago, there was no brightness adjustment. And this is one of the joys of working with software as a service. You didn't have to download a new version of the platform to get the new features. This brightness button just showed up one day, just as the image editor button just showed up one day. So whenever we add functionality, you get the benefit of the functionality right away, or you get the ability to turn on the functionality if it's something that you may not want. It may be a new feature that you don't want to enable. So a lot of these things are configurable. So I'm going to cancel this. And I'm going to cancel the size also because I want to show you the cropping. So cropping means we want to change how much of the image that we see. So I'm going to show you a couple of little things. So if I crop here and I just wanted to make a picture that's the top of the balloon, I can drag a box around the top of the balloon and click crop image to the bounds, and that will crop to that size. If I come over here and just put in width and height, so if I go 400 by 600, what that's doing, well, maybe make it 400 by 400. What that's doing is setting the size of the box here, but you'll notice that there are no grab handles, so I can't move it around. So I don't recommend putting in this information first. What I recommend is just dragging a box to whatever rough size you want. That gives you the handles. You can see these little black handles here. There's one in the corner. So there's one in the middle of each side and one in each corner. And then you can change it to, say, a specific size, say 400 by 400. Because now that you've got the drag handles, you'll see when I move my cursor to the middle, it becomes a four-headed arrow where you could just move that size area around. And if you need to move this down, you can, say, oh, I really only wanted it to be the basket, or and it's going to respect this size here. If you want to do it just freeform, just to get the basket, you would just blank out the sizes and just choose the basket. Now, obviously, you can't crop in that close on most images because it's going to be very pixelated. But if I do this and then come back up here and click on the check mark, now we've got picture just of the basket. So those are the main features, this ability to crop and specify a crop area, specify a crop size, things like that. So let me just resize this a little smaller. And let's go here, let's make it, let's try change the crop a little bit. And we just want to tight in on the balloon and do that. And let's just make it a little bit brighter, like that. And if it had come in on the side, we could rotate it, whatever. So now I have a couple of options here. I can click Save and Close, and it will update that original Balloons Over Countryside image so that now this is the one that's being stored. Or I could save it as a new file, and the word edited will appear next to it. So it leaves the original stored photo untouched and creates a new one. And there's a link to cancel. I don't know if this has the help in it yet. So if I click over here, if you're not sure about pretty much anything inside of ClubExpress, just remember that you've got this help icon here, which will give you some brief instructions and sometimes a link to a tutorial at the top. So first line of defense, as much as I know you like contacting our support people, ask the program first. So I can either just save it and close, and it'll update, or I'm going to save this as a new edited image. Now, when you save it as a new edited image, it says the image has been saved. Now I have to reload or research to find the file, and it will say original file name edited. So if I choose OK, remember we have Balloons Over the Countryside, and I search again, we will now have Balloons Over the Countryside and Balloons Over the Countryside edited. Now, if I come in to the edit icon, I can change the name of the file to something else, like cropped. If, in fact, you go in and edit a file, say if I edited this one here, and if I made this one really small, and I save this, it'll have the name edited, as you would expect. And if I did it again, and let's rotate it this way and save it. Takes a little while to save the larger images. And we sit here. And now if I search again, you'll notice now we have two of them called edited. Whereas this one, though, is rotated. So in this module, you can have multiple images. We'll call this one rotated, and we'll call this one small. Okay. Now, if you go into the web graphics, however, if we come in here into this and then we change its size, and we save it and save as a new image, we get the new one here. And you can change its title. But you can't change the file name because it's keeping the same file name. But if I go in and edit it again, and this time we decide that we want to rotate this and save as a new edited image, interestingly enough, we don't get an extra file. And if I look at it, we get the new edited image. So one of the differences between a web graphic and a photo is in a photo, you can make as many versions of edited files as you want, and they're all sort of tied together. But in a web graphic, you can have one and only one edited version through this mechanism. And whatever the last one that you edited will just have the same name, and then you could change the title. And of course, if you don't like something, you can just click on the X to delete it. So that's an interesting thing. Now, there is something else that this will show up. If we look at this logo here is a PNG file. And one of the reasons why a lot of people use PNG files is because they support transparency. So, for example, this graphic here, this balloon header, is a graphic. Let me see if I have here. Go header front. Yeah, okay. This one here is the balloon header. And it has a transparent background. So if I come over here to the control panel and go into website look and feel, if we go into the page header here, you will see that if I remove the background image, see how this image here is floating above the background. I'm just going to delete this here, and I'm going to delete the background image. And so now if I go back, say, to the simple editor, and I just want to insert an image, and I show files here, if we go here, you will see that this is a transparent image. And if I set the background image, let's try this one here. Now it's sitting on top of the background image. So that's because this clear area here, this area that has a transparency, lets another image shine through. And that is a feature of a PNG. JPEGs do not support this. So you need PNG. So now I'm going to cancel out all this stuff. And we'll come back to this in a little bit when we talk about image resizing. So now, if I go to web graphics, here's a restriction. So I showed you that for the logo, we have this Northwest Balloon Club logo, and it appears that this is on a white background. It's not on a white background. It is on a transparent background. let's go back and call this header. If I look at header front, okay, so this is the one we looked at before. If I go and edit it here, you will notice that I do not get a transparent background. The system is replacing the transparency with gray. And if you save it as a new edited image, say if I resize this smaller like that, and I save that as a new edited image and search or show files, that one here, we look at it, now has a gray background. So don't do that. Do not attempt to use the image editor function to edit PNGs with what's called an alpha channel that supports transparency. You'll see it right away in the image editor when you go to edit it. If you say, hey, this thing isn't supposed to be gray, let's just say that when you save it, what you see is what you're going to get. So that is a restriction that you should be aware of. This is a good place to break for any questions before we go on to some of the other stuff. Chris, anybody asking any questions in the chat?
So we do have a question, and the question is, how can I grab a member photo to use as a web graphic, such as a header?
Well, okay, so if you want to grab a member photo and use it as a web graphic, well, the first question is, well, do you really need to save it as a web graphic? Because let's see, in a header, you probably would have to do that. So if you're looking at a member photo, let's go back to the control panel and let's look at a photo. And let's say we looked at balloon over field. Okay, so here's your balloon over field photo. One of the easiest ways of doing it is just to use your browser. So if I right click on this, I can say save image as, and it will save it, put it wherever I want, and just save the image and then upload it as a web graphic. So that's probably the easiest way of doing it. And I would probably do it from here rather than in a photo album. But that's probably one of the easier ways of doing it. On the other hand, if you're looking at a photograph in well, in fact, let's just come over here to photo albums. And we'll see if we have one here. If we're looking at this, what I'm trying to find is a photo. Yeah. So if you're looking at a photo in a photo album here, if I right click on this, it's going to save the image and it'll probably save it in just this screen size. Much the same as if you right click on this, it would save the image as a thumbnail. But if the photographer or the member has allowed you to do high-res downloads for that particular image, you can click on this little icon here, which will download the original file size image, which is probably something that you'd want. And the way you would do this is if we went into here to edit, this was under best club photos, and we look and edit this and remember which one it was. So let's assume it was awesome balloons. Over here is where you would check off whether or not you allow high-res downloads, and you can turn them on or off for particular photos. So that's something that you could do. So you could either just save as or come over, turn on the ability to download the high-res version, and then just go download it and then maybe turn it back off again. That makes sense to some folks? There's a lot of ways to get there from here, but then you would go into the control panel and then just upload it as a graphic. One of the things we were talking about was file caching. If you update a photograph, you edit a photo and you don't make a new file, and you say you want to update it in place, well, it might not show up on your website because your browser may have already cached that photo. So it's I already have this photo. I don't need to download a new version of it. I don't know that there's a new version of it. So sometimes if you log out, log back in, it will update. And sometimes you need to explicitly refresh the cache. And I think holding down on most computers, I think holding down Shift and clicking on the function 5 key will do it, or you might have to clear your cache. But one of the ways to make sure that it's done correctly is go to another browser that's never seen that image. And so if you made it smaller, the other browser will see the smaller image, whereas your original browser that had the larger image may say, hey, I just don't need to do this. So it may take a little finessing to get the updated version to work. So let's talk about resizing, because resizing is something that people are going to edit files, use the image editor because they want to resize. Well, that's resizing the actual file itself, what's actually being stored inside of ClubExpress. But sometimes you just want to change the size of a file. And so let's look at it in a couple of different places. I'm going to start with probably the harder one first, which is the website look and feel in the page header. What if I wanted to resize these images here? So once again, I'm going to switch to the simple editor here. I am going to delete the background image, because the background image it just sits behind the whole thing. I'm going to delete the background image, and I'm going to delete this selected image. Oh, actually, I have to do that over here, because the reason I have to delete this here is that this one wasn't entered through the simple editor. It was entered in HTML code. So if I insert an image here, and if I go to, if I search for this one here, and I go to the header front, you will see something that's not terribly obvious in darker images. So you see, I've got a four-headed arrow here, which means I can push this thing around. But in the lower right corner, there is a little triangular icon. See if I can show you that a little better. You see it down here in this lower right corner here. That will allow you to resize it. Now, you'll notice that as I'm resizing it, it's changing the aspect ratio. If you want to maintain the aspect ratio, you hold down the Shift key. And now as you resize it, you'll see that my double-headed arrow is not even on it anymore. So you can resize it that way. The thing is that if I delete the selected element, let's insert another image. By the way, it's the same thing with a text box. You see how you get the little arrow here. So I can delete the selected element. And so if I insert another image, oops, and I look at, say, this one here, that little diagonal icon isn't terribly obvious here. So it's very easy to overlook that. And that's the reason why I wanted to show it to you on the white background, because there it is obvious. You still get the four-headed arrow to move it around, but it's kind of hard to see the resizing arrow here. That said, if you want this to be the background of your page, what you probably want to do is you want to set the background image here. And that way, when I look for header here, and let's use this one here, and I select this, then we can decide what cropping we want on it. And because this is not going all the way to the end, we can also select tiling. We can decide which way the tiling needs to go. So if we wanted it left to right or up to down or whatever, you can tile. If it's a smaller image, you can tile that way. So these are things you can do with the background image that you can't do with just regular insert image. So I recommend that. Also, if you go to the mobile setup for the header there, it will pick whatever your background image is here. So let me just cancel out of this. I'll just show you this really quickly. If we go to a mobile setup and I go to the header, you'll see that whatever was there, it'll pick up whatever was there in the normal setup. And if you want a different background image, you come over here, delete it from here. It only deletes it from the mobile side of things. It doesn't delete it from the normal display side of things. So a couple of weeks ago, I put a tutorial up about mobile website setup. Generally, you don't need to do mobile website setup, and you don't need to have specific pages for people that are viewing on, and this is only for people that are viewing your site on a mobile device, but in a browser. They're not using the mobile app. So if they're in Safari or some other browser on their phone or their tablet, you can decide whether or not you want a different homepage or different header, things like that. So that tutorial video talks about why you may or may not want to do that, and why you may or may want to have things like a top and bottom content area. But that's another topic, but you might want to take a look at that tutorial. As far as other ways of resizing, in a custom page, let's take a look at this custom page here, this demo page. And there are a couple of photos in this demo page. And whenever you have a photo or an image, you can click on it and right-click on it and choose the image properties. When I choose the properties, it shows me a couple of things. It shows me the size and width. So if I wanted this to be 250, this little link icon here is what's keeping the aspect ratio intact. If you click on this, you can break the link. So you can decide whether or not this width and height are to be the same, are to be relative. You can also do things like change the border color. You can say, oh, I want a border with 3 pixels. And so now we've got a smaller image with a border around it. So whenever you're in something like this, where you're in the advanced content editor, right-clicking on it will let you either change the image entirely, which is going to ask you for a different picture, or you can go change the properties, which are the display properties of this image. So I'm going to cancel this. We've seen how to do it in the header. The other place to look at would be, how do you do it in an email? So if we go into emailings, and I go into an email here, let me get rid of this row. Get rid of this row here. In an email, you decide what kind of row you want to put in. So if I drag in something that's 2 columns with text on the right, here I can insert either a photo or an image. Again, the photos are what that can be displayed in photo albums. Insert image is that which is in the web graphic. So if I insert a photo and I look for balloon and I pick up, let's do this picture here, it will try to size it automatically to fit in 2 columns. But you can resize it because it has this big, not so subtle resize handle here. Then maybe we should consider putting into the header page, because this is the only thing you can do here. If you right-click on it, you don't get that properties button. And here, though, is where you can change the image properties. You can decide whether it aligns left, right, or center. And you can decide here if you want a 3-pixel border in red, and select the color and apply it. And now we have that. And then when we preview the email, that's what the email would look like. So that's how you would do it with a normal image, one of these elements that has an image or a photo in it. If you add an HTML row and you go to edit that, in effect, you're in the advanced content editor again. So if I say this is text and I want to put in another photo here, if I want to put in balloon, and I choose my balloons over countryside, I can display it as a link to that photo, as a thumbnail to that photo, or display it as an embedded image. So we're just going to put it on the embedded image. And much like other photos, you can decide whether or not to allow a high-res download. So if I do that, this shows up, and it's going to be kind of big for an email. So like in the custom web page, I can right-click on this, choose properties, and say, oh, I really only want this to be 100 pixels wide, and now it's going to be a small picture. So that's the way that is done. Now, I'll tell you a couple of other places where you can have photographs, but you can't use the image editor. It just doesn't show up. For example, if you are in the Collectibles module, we look in Collectibles here. That's the easier way for me to find it. And now if I go into edit mode, and if I search for stuff in Collectibles, you can have pictures for the thing that you are collecting. And the Collectibles module allows people to keep an inventory of things. So it could be the balloons that you use, or the cars that you own, or the bicycles that you own. And in the pictures area here, you can decide whether to point it at a photo album or to use a particular photo, one photo. And here you can specify a photo, but you can't edit the photo. Similarly, in the storefront here, in the storefront, you can have photos in here. And if I go to edit this and I look at, where is it? This one here, I can look at the photos. Here we have a list of photos, but you can't edit these photos. But if someone is looking at their own photo album, this is where it's nice, because you're letting the users, your members, do the work. Just like they can update, they're allowed to add photos to their own albums, or change their own email address, or change their own name, or whatever. Somebody gets married or divorced and wants to change their name. If I go to the Spring Balloon Ride album for Martin Smith, when we click on this, we can add or remove photos. And for any one of these photos, we can edit the image. So not only can you, as the administrator, edit a photo, the user, your member, can come in and update the photo. And I may have to refresh the page here. And it may take a while for this to refresh. But the idea here is that the image can be made smaller or rotated and all of that. There is one other thing. This is how you edit existing photos that you've already uploaded, or images you've already uploaded. But ideally, you really want to upload photos and images that are, quote, the right size. So if somebody gives you a photo, well, how are you going to do that? Well, most of us will use an image editing program. Now, your operating system might have something to rotate images. So if I come over here, and if I go here, I can probably come over here, rotate right, rotate left. I can edit the image, which will open a local editor, which in this case is Paint inside of Windows. So you can do a lot of these things here. But there are those of us that like more control over this stuff. And so what you might do is you might have another editor like Photoshop or GIMP or something like that. Or you might opt to use something like an online editor like Pixlr. Is pretty popular. And Pixlr will let you open an image from your computer. If I say I want this image here, it uploads it to Pixlr. You do whatever it is that you're going to do with this. You make whatever changes. You've got a full suite of tools here. And then you can save the image, and it will save it back down to your computer. So that's another approach. So, Chris, we have any more questions?
I actually have a question that I think everybody would like to know, is since the photo editor does not handle the PNG with transparency, and you touched on external graphic tools, are the external graphic tools what you would recommend working with a transparent images?
Well, for transparent images, there are a lot of tools that will let you separate, say, a subject from the background, and then you can delete the background. So you have a layer that you have your subject, holding a basketball or whatever, your person holding a basketball, and you want to put them in front of a beach scene, or you want to put them in front of another basketball court or something like that. If you delete the background, in most cases, the background will show up as a checkerboard, a white and gray checkerboard pattern, which implies that there is no image there. Then when you save the image as a PNG, there's usually an option as to whether or not you want to save the transparency. In other words, do you want to just replace this background with something white, or do you want to leave the background as missing? And in certain things, you have control over the transparency, or you may have control over the opacity, so that you have something that may not be transparent, but you want it to sort of ghost over another image. So you have those kinds of tools. But generally, in PNG, you will have the option when saving a file to whether or not you want it to store the alpha channel. And in a GIF, there's usually a choice that says, what color do you want to make transparent? So if you wanted the white background to be transparent, you would click on that. So if you want something to be transparent, and I like transparent images, typically you'll want to create them in a program outside of ClubExpress, or the new versions of Photoshop and Pixlr and some of the other ones out there are wonderful at removing people from the background, or actually removing the background from and back of people. So if you have a bunch of people on a bicycle ride and you have people in the background that you don't want, you can take them into these photo editors and just sort of highlight the people that you don't want. And some of these will actually like fill in the sky and fill in the background with buildings. I mean, it's really incredible. Or you could remove it entirely, saying we want to have, this couple and they have two bicycles and we want to put them in front of the Taj Mahal. You could do that. Any other questions?
So far we have one comment from Bill, and he said very informative. So thank you, Bill. I see no questions yet.
All right. Well, either we covered the content completely or they're stunned into silence. So
Denise just wrote it. Yes, excellent. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate everybody taking time out of their very busy days to come watch us play with the rotating images around. And we hope to see you in the next webinar, and check out some of the new tutorials. Thanks, everybody, for coming.